WHP TV 21 Harrisburg.
The Incredible Hulk will not be seen tonight, so we may bring you the following News 21 special report. On-site emergency 1 year later.
Good evening, everyone. 1 year ago today, an event of monumental proportions struck Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, and its environs. For in one swift blow, the English letters TMI became global in importance. An accident had occurred at a nuclear power facility. And now, 1 year later, we have the opportunity as broadcasters to reflect and introspect, and for you, objectively, we believe, the portent of this particular accident. Remember the wise words of Abraham Lincoln, who once said, with public opinion, nothing can fail. Without it, nothing can succeed. We have tonight the opportunity and the obligation as broadcasters to look over our collective shoulders at what had occurred so that history prevents us from becoming hysterical. I would like to commend the news, announcing, and technical staffs of these stations for assembling the documentary you are about to see, which is a high point in vivid portrayal of what happened in Harrisburg. I do believe you will find it instructional, informative, fair, and in some measure conclusive. Thank you for this opportunity to share history with you tonight.
The initial problem happened about 4:30 this morning due to a feed water problem in the secondary plant, not a nuclear problem. This caused the reactor to trip on high pressure, followed by the pressurizer relief valves relieving, which resulted in a radioactive water release in the reactor building. Since radioactive coolant water was released inside the reactor building, this led to the emergency plan implementation. Radiation monitoring teams have been dispatched on-site and off-site to monitor for possible external radiation release. None has been found, and we do not expect any. We are presently bringing the plant down to an orderly cold shutdown condition, with no consequences expected to the general public.
I saw a plume of steam rise several hundred feet in the air. You could see it from the lights around the plant, a white steam, and it roared.
There was a small release of radiation to the environment. All safety equipment functioned properly. Metropolitan Edison has been monitoring the air in the vicinity of the plant constantly since the incident. No increase in normal radiation levels has been detected.
Our extrapolation showed that with the direction the wind was blowing, there was a possibility of getting some level of radiation on the western shore. So we dispatched our monitoring crew with a helicopter. They went over and confirmed that at that point there were no radiation releases to the general public.
The situation is more complex than the company first led us to believe. We are taking more tests, and at this point we believe there is still no danger to the public health. Metropolitan Edison has given you and us conflicting information.
Day 2, March 29th, brings assurances from Metropolitan Edison that cold shutdown should occur by day's end. The accident, says Med-Ed President Walter Kreitz, is nothing out of the ordinary realm. Small amounts of radioactive gases continue being vented from the auxiliary building. And the anti-nuclear forces come to Harrisburg with a forum like they've never had before.
Every dose is an overdose. Every dose of radiation is an overdose. There is no threshold. A little of that radiation does a little harm, more of it does more harm.
It is my feeling that the people within the radius of a few miles, especially pregnant women, should be told that there is a significantly increased risk to their babies, and that women who are carrying babies should be evacuated from within a few mile radius around that plant.
But cold shutdown was expected shortly, and Governor Dick Thornburg, at a press conference, rejects the notion of evacuation. Moments later, Med-Ed spokesman confirmed reports there will be no cold shutdown tonight. In fact, the spokesman says it may take up to a week.
Middletown has announced this time there's no evacuation. Please stay indoors with your windows closed.
Later, Governor Dick Thornburg lifts the warning, but in its place came the first suggestion that certain people leave the area around the nuclear plant.
Based on advice of the chairman of the NRC and in the interests of taking every precaution, we've advised those who may be particularly susceptible to the effects of radiation, that is, pregnant women and preschool-aged children, to leave the area within a 5-mile radius of the 3 Mile Island facility until further notice. We also ordered the closing of any schools within this area.
While the voluntary evacuations proceeded, a gaseous hydrogen bubble was developing in the crippled reactor. It had begun the day before and was instrumental in keeping experts from bringing the reactor to a cold shutdown. It was also the day Harold Denton arrived in Harrisburg to restore confidence in official statements and to assure the community that experts were in control.
I'd like to think that having brought in the number of people we are that will be on shift around the clock with the operators, there'll be less chance for surprises in the future. But I think that things are getting better. But, well, you know, equipment performances can't always be expected, so I think we can do more about planning and anticipating what might happen rather than having to react.
It's better today, though, than it was 3 days ago.
By now, thousands of local residents have left the area, including half the staff at the Fry Village Nursing Home in Middletown. Those who remained, it was announced, wouldn't be able to move patients quickly enough if an emergency arose. So the entire home was evacuated. Just a few minutes away, Med-Ed's Jack Herbine was holding his last news conference.
We are looking at the step-by-step procedure involves a continued venting from the pressurizer out into the reactor building, and of course a continual monitoring for the hydrogen buildup in the reactor building, and then subsequent calculations to determine on a daily basis the size of the gas bubble.
All information will now come from Harold Denton, and that afternoon he announced that 2 recombiners will be used in an attempt to reduce the size of the bubble. If that failed, other steps would be taken. Steps considered risky by nuclear experts and state officials who began to feel that a massive evacuation might very well become necessary.
The president came to the plant for one very simple reason: to assure the people that if the president of the United States and the governor of Pennsylvania were standing there together right at the plant site, that obviously there was no reason to believe that the whole thing was going to blow up at any minute. Obviously, that would reassure the population that we're going to have plenty of advance warning if we have to get out of here.
My primary concern in coming here this afternoon has been to learn as much as I possibly can as president about the problems at the 3 Mile Island nuclear power plant, and to assure the people of this region that everything possible is being done and will be done to cope with these problems, both at the reactor and in the contingency planning for all eventualities that might occur in the future.
It was on this morning that Metropolitan Edison jumped the gun, announcing with a sigh of relief that the bubble had been all but eliminated. We waited for Harold Denton to make it official, and that afternoon he did.
The number that you get from just running the numbers out today is on the order of 50 cubic feet as opposed to 850 cubic feet a few days back. There are a lot of competing effects. I don't want to be stampeded into concurring that the bubble is actually this small. We're trying to do more sophisticated analysis to be sure that the equations that are used to calculate bubble size properly include all effects. I think it's certainly a reason for optimism. It's certainly going in the direction I'd like to see it.
In retrospect, this was the beginning of the end. Families would soon be returning home. The national and international press was pulling out of the Harrisburg area. And not long afterwards, Governor Richard Thornburg would lift his suggestion of a limited evacuation. It was the beginning of the end, an end which we know is years away.
One year ago today, we here in central Pennsylvania became the first Americans to come close to the most damaging disaster resulting from a commercial nuclear plant, a meltdown. It was a unique experience in many ways. We faced something we couldn't see, we couldn't hear, feel, or taste. It was unlike the floods of Hurricane Agnes years before. There was no rising water to fight back or flee from. During those days last year, we were described by our governor as tough people, made of sterner stuff and able to endure the difficulty. In psychological terms, we are still in the post-traumatic stage, and the effects on residents, especially children, won't be known for years. Health studies continue and will continue for years while the TMI generation grows older. According to the Kennedy Commission, a blue ribbon panel appointed by President Carter to review the accident, the major health effect of the accident appears to have been on the mental health of people living in the region of TMI and of the workers at the plant.
I was at home. Of course, I didn't like what I heard, but I lived with it. We stayed the whole time. I'm out in Londonderry Township. I'm within the 5-mile limit.
Well, I was at home, and it was frightening.
I was not overly excited about it. I figured somebody who knew more about nuclear energy than I did would be able to fix it up.
Actually, I wasn't upset or nothing because when I heard it, and it didn't come as a great an emergency, you know. When I later found out that the situation was much worse than, you know, I had heard, my thought was about my son, mainly.
My parents called me at the office from Philadelphia and were very upset. I didn't understand what they were even upset about. So when I got home Thursday night, I made sure I watched the late news at 11 o'clock and got concerned, but I thought at that point, if my children had been exposed, they already had been. There wasn't anything I could do until Friday, when they started talking about an evacuation Friday morning. Then I got very concerned. My husband was working away in Ohio, so I took my kids out of school and took them down to Philadelphia.
Well, I was, in my home, and I was terrified.
Perhaps some of those thoughts by Middletown residents paralleled yours, perhaps not. It was that initial impact and reports during the ensuing days of leaking radiation and the possible meltdown which brought on fear and prompted the thought of whether one should stay or leave. There were some in Middletown and Goldsboro who stayed, and to this day are not worried. The Pennsylvania Emergency Management Agency has estimated that up to 170,000 people living within 25 miles of the plant left the area temporarily. That's about 45% of the population. In Goldsboro, where about 90% of the residents left during the initial days of the accident, the subject of evacuation remains a concern.
After the accident, I was told I was to have gone to Brogue. I have no idea where Brogue is.
Fairview Township mother Susan Shuttram was advised to take her young daughter and leave her home 5 miles away from the plant. At a recent town meeting in Goldsboro, Susan voiced her ongoing concerns about evacuation.
Mr. Henderson, A year has gone by. I still have not seen an adequate evacuation plan. Is this because it's impossible? Isn't it ridiculous to even pretend it could be done? Why not just rid ourselves of the source as safely and quickly, not necessarily as cheaply, as possible?
Last year, following the 28th of March, we further refined within a matter of several days the state plan. We sent people down here to York County to assist York County in the development of their plans. Plans were developed. Since that time, we have been receiving every week new guidance, direction from NRC and the Federal Emergency Management Agency, and we have been planning towards a moving target. Now, I accept too that this is wrong, but the only reason that we haven't come out with an updated plan for the 3 Mile Island area since 3 Mile Island is that the plan that we had a year ago was a workable, feasible plan.
According to Emergency Management Director Orrin Henderson, the state's 5-mile plan was more extensive than the 2-mile radius required by the NRC at the time of the accident. But when NRC Chairman Joseph Hendry urged Governor Thornburg on Friday to evacuate an area 20 miles around the plant, state and county emergency officials went back to the drawing board.
We began working on the York County plan Friday morning when all heck broke loose up there after that incident on Wednesday. And we had over 100 people here in the EOC. We worked from Friday morning straight through and completed it by late Sunday night.
The plan developed that weekend by Emergency Management Officer Les Jackson would allow for the transportation of more than 200,000 York County residents beyond the 20-mile zone. Relying mostly on private automobiles, officials plan to use I-83 as the main corridor to the southern tip of the county in northern Maryland. Buses were secured to move those unable to drive.
For our nursing homes and for the handicapped people, we had set up quite a group of buses to handle these people.
The closest the state came to testing its evacuation plan was Governor Thornburg's advisory to pregnant women and preschool children announced early Friday afternoon. He stopped short of calling for a full-scale evacuation when the State Bureau of Radiation Protection advised him the radiation releases of the morning had stopped. Many people in this area didn't wait for an official word to leave. An NRC survey found 76,000 people living within 10 miles of the plant left temporarily, and an additional 67,000 people left their homes in the area 10 to 15 miles from TMI.
I don't care where you go, you're going to run into something, whether it be nuclear power plant somewhere else. So I couldn't see any sense in going.
We left because we had preschoolers and they were knocking on the doors, and asking those with preschoolers to leave.
When they started talking about an evacuation Friday morning, then I got very concerned. My husband was working away in Ohio, so I took my kids out of school and took them down to Philadelphia. And they stayed there for 2 weeks.
We did not leave Middletown, though. We didn't think about leaving. If I was a younger man with kids home, I probably would have. But me and the wife just stayed here, and we did not leave, no.
What about in the event of another accident? Would you contemplate leaving?
I don't know. It all depends on what the officials, they're supposed to have a warning system and an evacuation plan planned. I would leave it up to them, because I would never know how bad it was if there was something else happening again.
Here in the Nerve Center of Pennsylvania's Emergency Management Agency, officials have been meeting weekly since last July to revise and update the 20-mile evacuation plan developed during the height of the crisis last spring. According to PEMA Director Orrin Henderson, those plans are as ready now as any evacuation plan can be.
Plans provide for pre-designated major routes of egress from the area. There are the supporting or the surrounding counties that would be supporting the affected counties with mass care facilities. Each has been pre-designated, and each of our counties that require additional outside support know exactly the numbers of people that each one of the other counties can accommodate. So that has all been worked out.
Henderson readily admits the success of any evacuation plan depends on the integration of local, county, and state plans. The degree to which local officials have been involved during the past year in the development of emergency plans varies between each of the 6 counties in the TMI area. In York County, Goldsboro Emergency Management Director says the communication has been minimal.
During the incident, we could get very little information out of our county organization. The majority of the information we got was from the state agency. It wasn't supposed to work this way. It was supposed to go from the state agency to the county agency to the local agency. But the problem was it didn't work that way. We had to go somewhere else because our county government wasn't giving us the information that we needed. There's where the problem is. The problem may still be there.
York County Emergency Director Jackson says he will meet with local officials like Amshire early next month to discuss the new 20-mile radius plan.
The local elected officials, they have to get in this act too. They're elected to protect their people, and we're going to rely upon them to have their own plans to get their people moving.
Checking with the other counties within the 20-mile TMI zone, most report their plans are now ready and are being reviewed by local and state officials for concurrence. Perry is the sole exception, which is holding on to its PEMA-approved plan developed last year. All the plans revolve around keeping pre-designated exit routes open for 2 lanes of private automobiles, with an average of 3 people per car traveling away from TMI. Opposite lanes would be used for emergency vehicles only. Henderson says the counties can rely on state assistance to move hospital patients and disabled residents.
We know the medical resources, the ambulance resources within every county within Pennsylvania, and we will bring those resources in as rapidly as we can identify the need for them.
Henderson adds similar planning between PEMA and county representatives has gone into preparing emergency plans for the evacuation of prisons and schools, 2 of the other large question marks during the accident. Taking its lessons from TMI, the NRC has proposed expanding its evacuation regulations to an area of 10 miles. PEMA has followed suit and is developing 10-mile evacuation plans from each of the state's nuclear plants. And here, in the neighborhood of 3 Mile Island, local, county, and state officials will be constantly revising and updating existing evacuation plans for a 20-mile radius. In the words of Lebanon County Emergency Management Director Robert Boyer, let's hope to God we never have to use them.
In a memorandum distributed a year ago by the Christian Churches United were the words, "Whether you evacuated your family or stayed in your home, you made the best decision you could." The memo continues, "Do not argue with yourself or others about the wisdom of that decision. Let us be grateful to be alive and have each other again." A study commissioned by the state has concluded that the area's economy returned to near normal shortly after the crisis ended. But some adverse economic effects remain. The most major involves the housing market. As listings rise, the cost of housing is not lowered. In fact, costs are going up too. A state commission concluded that last March, our area suffered a $100 million loss, but most of that was later recovered. Included was a $5 million short-term loss in tourist revenues. But major hotel chains such as Marriott and Sheraton have confidence and continue to develop major facilities within a 10-mile radius of the plant. Still to be resolved is a class action suit filed on behalf of businesses and residents living within 25 miles of the plant. Over the past year, anti-nuclear sentiments have mushroomed in our area. Besides the residents of Middletown and Goldsboro, other area communities are very concerned about nuclear power. Witness the number of township meetings in which resolutions concerning the future of TMI have been discussed, including Mechanicsburg, which is a borough some distance from the plant. The Rogovin Special Inquiry and Report, sponsored by the NRC, says a similar accident could have happened in a lot of places, but it happened here. During the week of March 17th, WHP stations sponsored a public opinion poll among persons who took part in a research project last year conducted by Elizabethtown College's Social Research Center. All respondents live on the east side of the Susquehanna River within a 15-mile radius of TMI. 1 year ago, in response to the questions, "Do you support the use of nuclear power as a source of energy for our nation?" 64% were in favor, with 26% against nuclear energy. This year, the WHP survey found a drop in support of nuclear power. 56% are now in favor, 37% are opposed. In a follow-up question, WHP asked, how would you describe your feelings about your personal safety a year after the accident? In terms of fear, we asked, would you say you have a lot, some, or no fear about your personal safety? The response indicates that 57% of those interviewed noted they feared for their personal safety. And the breakdown of the responses shows twice as many women as men indicated they have a lot of fear. The nuclear industry hammers home the fact that no one was killed as a result of the TMI accident. But the fact does not remove a deep mistrust of the nuclear industry, which has grown because of the accident.
Consequences they knew would be so great that the reactor should never be licensed to operate. But in the way of the NRC, they took the probability analysis, they admitted that it was faulty, they remanded the proceedings for further hearings before the appeal board of the NRC, and they went ahead and gave the plant a license to operate anyway.
There is one common feeling among these people, members of one of the anti-nuclear groups that was formed after the accident last year. And it is that same feeling that brought them together. And that feeling is fear. But that's no surprise, since they've all lived through the worst commercial nuclear accident. But what is different among these people is the basis of that fear. For some, the fear stems from knowing, as many of these people do know quite a bit about nuclear power, and what they say are the pitfalls. But for many of them, the fear is based on not knowing, not being an authority, or even part-time expert on nuclear energy, but at least knowing that they're afraid of what could happen. That's the case of Tom and Nancy Mishek. There's only one way to describe this family: typical. 3 sons, Mike, Brian, and Tommy. Their father has a good job as an executive with an office products firm, and their mother also works. They remember all too well what happened 1 year ago. They left town, picked up and went to Shamokin for several days. The incident has changed their lives, at least for Nancy. She is an active member of PAIN, People Against Nuclear Energy. The idea of having a cause is now something new to her. But for practically every parent who belongs to an anti-nuclear group, that cause is one thing only.
Children. I grew up here, and I want them to have a safe environment to grow up in. This is their home, and I just want them to have the happy, safe childhood I had growing up here. And I don't know right now if they will have that.
20 years from now, are they going to have cancer of the throat and whatnot? It's just more, the concern, I think, is for the children right now, more so than ourselves. Because if we last 20 years, that's the life expectancy of us.
But what caused this fear? They didn't think of 3 Mile Island as they do now before the accident. They claim they don't know all the technicalities of nuclear power. But they feel if they did, it wouldn't change their feelings much, because their fear mainly came from a lack of trust in those in charge. And that resulted from not knowing who to believe when the accident occurred.
One time you heard there was a bubble, then you heard there wasn't a bubble, and how are you supposed to believe? One says no, there isn't, and another one says yeah, there is, and who do you believe?
So many stories, I don't think, I know Med-Ed doesn't know what they're doing. I don't have total faith in the NRC either.
They say there wasn't that much radiation left out. I don't believe it. I hope they prove us wrong and say you were wrong. But I just don't trust them. I don't believe anything they say.
What would it take for them to convince you that everything is okay?
I don't know if they could ever convince me. I don't know if they could. Because we've been lied to so many times. I don't know if they could ever convince me it would be safe.
Can Metropolitan Edison and the Nuclear Regulatory Commission ever be trusted again by the Mishiks or any other nuclear family living in this area? Can the nuclear power industry ever dispel the fears that those people have? Well, Med-Ed says it can by presenting them with the facts.
Once we do get TMI cleaned up, then we believe that a lot of the emotional stress and strain will have disappeared because...
Sandy Pollan is manager of communications for Med-Ed. Since the accident, he's been involved in meetings with the community to discuss how the situation has progressed in the past year and what is really happening as far as radiation and the dangers, if any, that the public faces. He also agrees that residents around the plant deal with two kinds of fear, emotional and factual, but he says the true facts will dispel both fears.
Well, I don't think that it's possible to convince somebody. I think what we have to try to do is to try to lessen the tension a little bit. We have to present the information in such a way that they begin to believe some of the information. They have to look at the information that others are providing, the medical profession, the regulatory bodies, other state and federal agencies, and the kinds of information that we're putting together. And hopefully, to try to lessen some of the strain and stress that they may have. Now, there's nothing that's 100% guaranteed, nothing. Nuclear power, driving an automobile, a coal-fired plant, going to work, walking out on the street. There's nothing that's 100% guaranteed. It says that there is not going to be anything that can possibly happen. There's just nothing that says that. Certainly everything that we do, all of us in our day-to-day endeavors, whether you work at TMI or whether you work at the post office or whatever, the human element is always with us. When we drive our car, we have to control, but we can't control the other person.
These people are afraid of the fact that they really can't see anything at this point. Maybe 20 years down the line, they'll know if one of their children develops whatever. How do you counteract that?
We know, and others have agreed, and others have made calculations and so forth and so on, that the largest dose that anybody could have received as a result of the accident was in the neighborhood of 80 millirems, which is considered low-level radiation. Everybody in their natural surroundings in this area gets about 80 to 100 millirems, and that doesn't count any medical or whatever. All we know is that the limitations on radiation levels are set by the government, and those limitations are developed by an independent group of medical people. And the medical people are the ones that say, hey, up to this point in time, they don't have any evidence that would indicate that there's going to be any effect from low levels of radiation. What happens 20 years from now, we can't predict. We're assuming, we believe, by the way, we believe that there will not be any ill effects from this.
The question of credibility has cropped up many times since last year's accident. Pollan agrees that many people probably feel as though Med-Ed is no longer credible, but he feels for the most part Med-Ed is, depending on how you define the term.
Credibility is an often used word. Sometimes it's overworked. I think what we really need to do is to make a definition of credibility. Does credibility mean trying to communicate to the public to the best of your ability the information that you know at hand, the best way you possibly can? We've been doing that. If there are those that say that we haven't been doing that, then maybe we are suffering some credibility.
And when I recite my smiling,
But for many people, even those who have lived through the accident, it is difficult for them to determine if nuclear power is good or bad, but they do want to form their own opinions. Just several weeks ago, the West Shore Rotary Club invited 2 anti-nuclear speakers to its Wednesday night meeting. While the Rotary plans to invite people from Med-Ed and the NRC to speak to its group, the members decided to hear the anti-nuclear side of the issue at this particular meeting.
You talk to the persons who favor nuclear power, who are the apologists for it, or if they're not apologists, they're certainly defenders of it, you will get 4 basic arguments. First, the nuclear power is clean, that it's safe, that it's economical, and that it's necessary, that you can't do without it. I hope to be able to answer some of those arguments for you.
The amount of radiation that gets out is different routinely than gets out during an accident, obviously. There has been a great effort to try to contain the amount of radiation, but the point is that it cannot be totally contained. So therefore, there is environmental contamination to whatever degree. And the more research that occurs, the more we see that the less radiation we're exposed to, the better off we are.
But has the past year of trying to dispel the people's fears been a successful attempt? Have the people really put their trust in the industry? Are they willing to accept what those in charge say as the truth? This meeting just last week in Middletown could possibly be the answer to those questions. The NRC held this meeting to explain MedEd's proposed plan to vent krypton gas from the containment building. And while this meeting was a long one, the people's feeling about that venting plan was summed up early and very quickly.
All for releasing the krypton applaud. Those against releasing the krypton.
Just several minutes ago, we heard Sandy Powell of MedEd say that once 3 Mile Island is cleaned up, the people's fears will disappear, and that could possibly be the case. But the venting of the krypton gas from the containment building is just the beginning of the cleanup, and was very evident at that meeting last week. The cleanup would never begin, but those people have their say. Once again, we have to talk about fear and how it is based on the unknown for many of those people. A basis for the pro-nuclear side of the issue has been that there are risks with other forms of energy. There can be fires and explosions at oil-burning plants. Coal is bad for the environment, and it gives miners black lung disease, and we have learned to accept those risks. But the people say they can live with those fears because they can see them for themselves and determine at that point in time if they should leave an area. But they can't see radiation in the air, or feel it, or smell it. As one of these residents around the plant told me just recently, that they're afraid of having to wait maybe 20 years before learning if they or their children were seriously affected by radiation from the accident. And all of the industry's evidence showing them that that was not the case has not changed their attitudes at this point in time.
Even after a year following the accident, there appears to be no ready answers about making nuclear power plants totally safe. In the Elizabethtown College research of a year ago, a total of 35% of those questioned said they objected to TMI being used again as a nuclear plant. Of the 59% who said yes, 37% qualified their response by supporting the plant's use only if safety and inspection procedures are improved. In the follow-up WHP poll, we found that 50% of those contacted this year continue to support a restart of the plant, which is 9% less than last year, and that 9% loss has now gone into the figures of those opposed to a restart. While there may be increased fears, there clearly is an increased awareness and concern about safety by both the industry and its regulators. 1 year ago, 72% approved of the way government officials handled the accident. In the WHP-sponsored follow-up survey a year later, there is an amazing turnabout. Now, 32% of those questioned approve of the way government handled the situation. Those figures represent a drop of 40% in confidence, which could have been a result of government action since the accident.
The Nuclear Regulatory Commission's field office here in Middletown was opened over 10 months after the accident, and that time frame has become typical of the caution, some say sluggishness, with which the NRC moves in its role as watchdog of metropolitan Edison. It took about 5 months for the NRC to approve the use of Epicor 2, 3 months to decide it was safe to enter the airlock at the plant, and the proposal currently under review to vent krypton gas from the containment building has been under consideration since last November. Only recently have some commissioners urged that decisions regarding the cleanup be made in terms of weeks instead of months. Many people blame the NRC for the fact that MedEd has done little to find alternatives to venting radioactivity from the plant and is now able to claim that there's no time to do anything but vent it. Others dispute that, but either way, very little that MedEd does on the island is done before first consulting with the NRC, in effect its regulatory probation officer.
My role is to assure that the recovery programs are conducted in full conformance with commission regulations, commission orders, and good practices. That's my role. Our other role, of course, is to review the operating procedures that are developed to carry out part of the recovery program.
And Collins insists that the extra scrutiny given Med-Ed is not a form of punishment.
I think that the extra scrutiny is warranted because of some of the unique problems that exist. That this is the first time that we've experienced an accident of this nature in a nuclear power plant, and we're dealing with much different levels of radioactivity than one would deal in a normal power plant.
If Med-Ed finds itself submissive to the NRC, it owes its entire existence to the people who sit here on the Public Utility Commission. The agency which regulates all utilities in the Commonwealth is currently in the process of deciding whether or not Med-Ed may even continue to generate electricity in Pennsylvania after what happened at the plant a year ago.
While unable to speculate on the chance of that happening, the Commission chairman admits that stripping Med-Ed of its license would have far-reaching effects, both here and across the country.
If that were the case, there would have to be some mechanism in place whereby another utility would pick up the service, because you could not put all the people in Med-Ed's territory out of electricity. And I would suspect also that there would be ramifications for every other electric utility in the country as far as financial ratings, etc.
Another landmark decision the panel must make is who pays what share of the cost of what went wrong at TMI. During the 4-month proceeding, the commissioners have been told that Med-Ed has no choice but to have the customers pay, since the stockholders have already been hurt. They've also been told the customers should not have to pay for someone else's mistake. In many ways, it's a no-win situation.
There are many aspects to who pays for what, paying for the cost of the accident versus paying for cost of replacement power, and all the, cost of paying for a unit that's not currently in operation. I would suspect that no matter what decision this commission renders at the end, there will be some group of individuals that will not be exactly pleased with it. This commission is in a definitely no-win situation. I think what we can hope for is that the public understands that whatever our decision is one we have tried to come to in using all our abilities possible and come down with a reasonable decision.
Regardless of who gets socked financially, the neighbors of the plant clearly have been paying psychologically for the accident. That was the top health hazard cited by many of the various investigations of the accident, including the Presidential Commission on TMI, which said the major health effect of the accident appears to have been on the mental health of the people living in the region near the plant. What many consider to be the most unnerving finding of those probes comes from an investigation headed by Mitchell Rogovin, performed for the NRC. That report claimed that had technicians in the plant during the accident done nothing for another 30 to 60 minutes, the core could have melted down.
Last month, when the plant vented traces of radioactive gas and Med-Ed failed to warn public officials about the incident, Middletown Mayor Robert Reed sent a telegram to President Carter requesting the Department of Health, Education, and Welfare to take charge of monitoring radiation releases. Mayor Reed also said the public's right to know and the need to know have been routinely abused. A year ago, in the Elizabethtown research, 51% of the respondents indicated the public had not been told the truth about the situation. A year later, our follow-up survey has found that 68% of those contacted believe they have not been told the truth about the situation. The most glaring change of mind occurred among people aged 18 to 24, having less than a high school education. When the accident occurred last year, Med-Ed was assuring everyone there was no cause for alarm. That was an optimistic stance, which cost the utility its credibility, and as a result, left the company fighting for survival. Med-Ed has changed its president. General Public Utilities Corporation, the parent company and owner of the plant, is reshuffling the way it operates its nuclear holdings. Yet the loss of credibility is not only reflected in emotions of area residents. It is shared by the editorial board of the local newspapers, The Patriot and the Evening News.
Saul Kohler is the executive editor of the Patriot, Evening, and Sunday News.
He's also on the paper's editorial staff, which has consistently opposed nuclear power since the accident last year.
My own philosophy is that in Pennsylvania we have a law which requires automobile inspection twice a year. They never look to see whether you can start your car. The starting mechanism is not part of the inspection. The brakes and the braking mechanism is an integral part of that inspection. And if you cannot stop your car, you cannot get a sticker. If you do not have a sticker, you cannot drive in this state. And so it is with 3 Mile Island, Med-Ed, GPU. If they cannot shut it off, they should not have the privilege of starting it up. It is as simple as that.
In one of his most scathing editorials, shortly after Med-Ed dumped radioactive water into the Susquehanna River amid heavy protests, Kohler wrote, Med-Ed gives chutzpah meaning. Chutzpah, he wrote, is a Hebrew word, which used to be defined as a man who murders his parents and then begs for mercy in court on the grounds he's an orphan. No more, Kohler wrote, chutzpah now is defined as Metropolitan Edison, which in the face of public opinion, court orders, and Nuclear Regulatory Commission edicts, and on the basis of a stupid technicality, dumps radioactive garbage into the Susquehanna River. Malice, gall, audacity, thoughtlessness, infamy, indiscretion, temerity, inhumanity, insensitivity, malevolence, Med-Ed. That editorial, Kohler said, infuriated GPU Chairman William Coons. And there are others who feel the paper is creating a pessimistic attitude toward nuclear power, attitudes not conducive to the economic well-being of central Pennsylvania.
I don't think we are being negativistic at all. The folks who gave us 3 Mile Island, the chairman of the board, the president, the other officials of Med-Ed and GPU have said in my presence and outside of my presence that although the Patriot News has been against them editorially, although the Patriot News advocates the entombment of 3 Mile Island as a memorial to nuclear power, they have always been treated meticulously, fairly in the news columns of these newspapers. And for that, I am thankful for them and to our capable staff here, that regardless of what our editorial position is, we are fair in our news coverage.
But the newspaper has come under fire for having a negative influence on the community. While we have heard from community groups concerned for our future safety of nuclear operations, there is one organization that is out to prove we have survived.
Our concern was that because of the national and worldwide attention that was devoted to TMI and the prophets of doom that were saying we were forever scarred, that our agricultural products would not be acceptable, that you couldn't safely buy a Hershey bar. The initial thought was that this place would become a deserted, there was initially one convention that spurned Harrisburg, I think was the hardware dealers. So that in an effort to take steps to see that these things didn't happen, this organization was put together.
Harrisburg attorney Ed First is chairman of the Capital Area Task Force, a group of more than 100 civic, community, business, and government leaders impaneled shortly after the accident in an effort to keep the area economically and socially stable. Collectively, First says, we geared ourselves toward forward movement in 10 major areas.
I think a year after TMI, a number of affirmative and positive things have happened, that the business, economic, employment climate here is stronger than it was a year ago and is going to continue to grow because we have 2 great new hotels now being erected that are going to bring people and provide employment. The South Bridge is a $65 million project. That's one of the things we specifically worked on. That contract's been awarded. That's underway. Contracts have been awarded to upgrade and improve Olmsted, including a major contract for a complete architectural design for a whole new terminal. The Cameron Street extension is coming to pass. The old railroad station, as you know, title's been transferred to the Redevelopment Authority. That's going to get a facelift and an upgrading. Hopefully, the new Pennsylvania State Justice Center will be located here instead of Philadelphia. That we're still working on. So for all of these reasons, there is specific room to believe that we're better now, and we're going to get better than we were on March 28th, 1979.
World attention has been focused on that relatively small island in the Susquehanna River, 10 miles south of Harrisburg, and that attention has remained there in varying degrees and will for some time to come. Currently, there is public discussion about the release of radioactive krypton-85 gas into the atmosphere so that cleanup operations can begin. 51% of those questioned in the WHP poll said they disapprove of such practices. That vetting is part of a 4-year, $400 million cleanup project Med-Ed has embarked on. A project that must be done before anyone can talk about generating electricity at the plant again.
The unprecedented task of cleaning up this crippled plant began even before it was in what's described as a cold shutdown mode. But from day one, the cleanup has been marked by a controversy over how fast to proceed. During the past year, this is what has been cleaned up. The auxiliary building has been swept and scrubbed free from radiation. In addition, the fuel handling building is about 90% clear from contamination. And about 165,000 gallons of water have been decontaminated through a system constructed here called Epicor 2, built to process water mildly contaminated during the accident.
And while some may say that's not much to show for a year's work, the man whose job it is to guide the plant back to recovery disagrees.
There's been a tremendous amount of work done at 3 Mile Island. First of all, in modifying the plant to put us in position to ensure that over the long duration of the cleanup, we would be able to assure ourselves of maintenance of safe conditions in the plant. And secondly, in terms of actual physical work to start the cleanup in the auxiliary buildings, fuel handling buildings, processing of the water there. And we've also done a lot of work that doesn't have much visibility in initial planning and engineering effort necessary to do the cleanup inside the containment building. So while some of it has not progressed as rapidly as we like, and I think the most notable would be the processing of the water with Epicor 2, that system nevertheless has worked very well. It's worked as well as we wanted to in terms of the degree of cleanup.
Epicor 2 works much like a home water softener. The radioactive particles are removed as the water passes through these resin beds. The resins are then stored underground until permission is granted to truck them off the island. With Epicor 2 being used, the attention now is shifting to the remaining major step of the cleanup, the containment building, which houses the mangled reactor core. It also houses 600,000 gallons of highly contaminated water, part of the primary coolant system which leaked onto the floor during the accident, exposing the core. A system has not yet even been designed to decontaminate that water, but a year later, workmen are on the verge of entering the containment building, having successfully entered an airlock and looked inside through a window. The actual containment building entrance would be made easier, says Med-Ed, by first removing 57,000 curies of radioactive krypton gas trapped in the building since the accident. And the easiest way to do that, says the NRC staff, is by venting the gas into the atmosphere, a little bit at a time.
Med-Ed's proposal to vent the krypton gas has become the most controversial aspect of the cleanup, and simply the thought of releasing another dose of radiation into the atmosphere is enough to make many of these residents blood boil, and nothing the NRC spokesman can say can quell their anger, even though they try.
The Commission has asked us to look at the possibility of releasing the same amount over a couple of day period at a much higher elevation at a time when weather conditions are such that the dose would be no different than what are projected in the environmental assessment.
Okay, then exactly, Mr. Voller, do you personally approve of this venting? I mean, if it were up to you, would you vent?
I made as part of the staff that prepared the environmental assessment, I did make that recommendation, yes.
Just one more question.
A few months after the accident, the NRC's Harold Denton reminded us that his agency does not make policy based on public opinion. The issue of venting could very well be an example of that statement. The venting is expected to begin sometime in May and last for about 2 months. The longer the cleanup continues, it's generally agreed, the greater the chance that something else could go wrong with the plant. One of those wrongs is the staggering possibility the reactor could go critical once again.
The chances of going critical are very slim. We do have in-core neutron monitor that is working. We do maintain the boron concentration in the primary system to assure that the reactor stays in a subcritical condition. There are mechanisms to avert that condition, so that is not, in my opinion, a very real probability.
The most conservative estimations put the cost of the cleanup effort at $400 million over the next 3 years. But for Robert Arnold, it's all being done with the expectation of again seeing electricity being generated by nuclear fission at 3 Mile Island.
My judgment is that that will be the ultimate outcome with Unit 2, that it will eventually operate again. I'm personally dedicated to ensuring that we have the opportunity to do that by the conduct of the cleanup and by the performance of the organization there that will be responsible for that cleanup. I think that to a large extent the issue will be decided on the outcome of the Unit 1 hearings. I think if we are permitted to operate Unit 1, we'll demonstrate that we've got the organization, we've got the capability, we've got the dedication to operate that unit safely, and the issue of Operation Unit 2 will pretty much fall or stand on the issue of Operation Unit 1.
But returning either unit to service will be much easier if some way, at least in part, the confidence can be won of those people who glance out their windows every day and see the giant cooling towers. Arnold knows that task is ahead of him, but winning public confidence is a battle that won't even be fought unless this plant can first be cleaned up.
I'm really not concerned about winning public confidence on the Operation Unit 2 at this time. Clearly that's a chore that we have with regard to Unit 1, but with regard to Unit 2, I'm concerned at this point only with winning confidence that we can conduct this cleanup safely and within criteria that will give full assurance to the public that their health is not threatened.
Earlier in this program, we reported that 50% of those contacted to some degree now believe that the TMI plant should be allowed to operate again. We also find that 15% of the respondents would consider moving away if the plant does operate again. Only a 2% change from a year ago, virtually no change. The coming weeks will bring decisions on a federal level on what actions are to be taken to clean up the plant. Decisions on a state level about future operations of the plant and Med-Ed. And on a personal level, a decision on how we will continue to live and deal with those actions. To some, such as Steve Brooks of the March 28th Coalition, the enormous cooling towers are a symbolic monument to something that we hope is tied only to the past. But let's add the remarks of the Reverend Richard Deersdorf, who said from the pulpit of the Goldsboro Church of God 1 year ago, "I think God has been very kind to let us go as we have in this world, but I think he is now saying, be careful."
Hello, everybody. This is Barbara Service. I'd like to take this opportunity to show you exactly what manufactured housing is. You're invited to inspect homes of quality, comfort, and affordability, built with pride to meet the needs of an energy-conscious America. Designed by leading architects, constructed in accordance with strict governmental regulations. See for yourself at our Modern Living Showcase this Friday, Saturday, and Sunday at the State Farm Show Building, Harrisburg. See you there.
The preceding program has been a News 21 special report.
Come to Sunderland and see why more people say,
I like Sunderland Chevrolet.
One good reason, this modern gas-saving Chevy Chevette with full coil suspension and unitized body. A lot for the money, just $39.99. This elegantly designed 4-speed Chevy Monza, sleek and aerodynamic with front bucket seats, only $42.99. And this half-ton fleet-side gas saver, Chevy's most popular pickup, just $45.99. See why more people say,
I like Sunderland Chevrolet.
Market Street, Lemoyne.
Okay, I'll bet you breakfast.
You're on.
What's the bet?
I say Hardy's biscuits are homemade, baked fresh. My man says that they come frozen in a big cold truck.
Come see for yourself. See, we mix the dough from scratch, then bake them up fresh every morning. How does that smell?
Like a bake shop.
Then we fill them with sausage, country ham, or chopped beefsteak.
Good as they are every day, they're even better when somebody else buys it.
Hardy's, best eating in town, up and down and all around.
WHP TV 21, Harrisburg.